I never used to be interested in Western role-playing games. Anytime I wanted that RPG fix, I always gravitated toward games like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. It wasn't until earlier this year when I rewatched Game of Thrones with my wife that I found myself itching to play some Western RPGs for pretty much the first time in my life. Around that time, I saw a trailer for Dragon Age: The Veilguard, and despite fans' mixed reactions, it sparked my interest in the franchise. So I went on eBay and bought myself this copy of Dragon Age Origins for the Xbox 360 in order to give this series a try from where it all started. Right off the bat, you might be wondering why I picked up the 360 version of this game. The reason is pretty simple. I wanted to own the game physically, and the 360 version performs slightly better than the PS3 version from what I've seen online. Apparently, it also has a decent boost in performance if you pop it into an Xbox Series X, but the only Xbox console I own is this old 360, so I'm just making do with what I have. The only other option is the PC port, which I've also heard mixed things about. Apparently, it's kind of difficult to get running and requires some mods, and even with that, it'll crash quite often. I really didn't want to deal with that, and even if the PC version does have better performance, I would much prefer a more stable experience without any required modding on console. Thankfully, I prefer playing games on console anyway. If I had a proper desktop PC, I'd probably feel differently, but all I have is this laptop that overheats really quickly. So if a game is on console, even if it struggles to hit 30 FPS most of the time, I'm most likely gonna play it on there regardless. The performance on Xbox 360 definitely isn't amazing, but it's 100% playable from what I've experienced of the game so far. All of the footage you're seeing is captured on my 360, so if you aren't a big PC gamer, this is what you can expect the game to look like, and it's honestly not as bad as Redditors will make it out to be. You'll experience frame rate drops here and there in larger areas or battles with a lot of enemies on screen, but I eventually stopped noticing it because of how much fun I was having with the game itself. Ultimately, I'd love to play all of my 7th gen games on a shiny new Xbox with boosted performance, but I can't really afford one at the moment, plus I already have a PS5, so I can't really justify the expense of a new Xbox that I would mainly only use for playing old games. But anyway, onto the game itself. I never knew what to expect from Dragon Age Origins. I had always heard nothing but good things, but like I said earlier, this style of Western fantasy RPG never really interested me until very recently. So upon starting up the game, we are asked to create a character, so I made a classic sword and shield warrior here. I tried to make him look somewhat like me, hence the baldness. That way I would have a nice self-insert for the game's story. And speaking of the story, I'm surprised by how quickly it hooked me, especially as someone who doesn't usually play games for the story. From what I've experienced so far, Dragon Age Origins is a great game to play for the story, especially if you're like me and you're caught up on House of the Dragon and in the mood for some more fantasy dragon-centric politics. The writing and voice acting in this game is shockingly good, especially when you take into consideration that the game is nearly 15 years old. Not that older games can't have good writing and voice acting, I just wasn't expecting it to be this good. The voice acting sounds very authentic to the setting, which was kind of an issue that I had with Skyrim, a game where a lot of NPCs speak in Old English but don't actually do anything to disguise their American accents, which really took me out of the experience at times in that game. Origins, on the other hand, crafts a much more believable world thanks to its writing and performances, in my opinion. I'm not trying to knock Skyrim by any means, but it's just something I noticed having played these two games around the same time. Alright, let's talk about gameplay. I was a bit lukewarm on the game's combat in the early hours here. It felt a bit clunky to me, and I just kind of felt like there was no skill involved. I just mashed the A button to swing my sword until all the enemies in the room were dead. I occasionally pressed B to heal, and that was pretty much it. Thankfully, it wasn't long before the difficulty ramped up, and I found myself needing to strategize more and more with how I approached combat. My main character here is your fairly basic sword and shield warrior, and for the first couple of hours of the game, I was kind of wishing I had chosen a more interesting vocation for him. That was until I started learning new skills and realizing just how strategic I could be, especially once my party had some magic casters who can honestly be game-breaking at times. My general strategy is to run in with my main character and stun enemies with my shield skills, while I try to absorb the majority of the hits thanks to my heavy armor. Meanwhile, my mages stay behind me and cast defensive spells until the battle is over. It's really satisfying once you figure out what works for you. And now that I have a couple of magic users on my team, I'm actually really glad I went with the warrior class for my main character, otherwise we would get beaten up pretty badly by enemies that primarily use physical attacks. Outside of combat, I really love the way story progression and exploration work in this game. The world is broken up into several individual locations that open up as you make your way through the story. Many people would probably prefer a big open world, but this is exactly the kind of structure that I've been craving from games lately. I'm a bit burnt out on open world games at the moment, and I found myself craving more structure as much as I do enjoy more open games like the latest Zelda titles and Skyrim. As great as open world games are, sometimes I just want to cut out the fluff and get straight into the action and story beats. Dragon Age Origins is structured in a way where it feels open world even though it technically isn't. You can choose your own path forward in terms of the order of places you visit and the narrative decisions you make to an extent, but instead of spending 10 minutes walking through a big empty field in order to reach the next area, you select the location on this map screen. And I don't know, I get that some people would prefer a true open world, and sometimes I would as well, but right now, and especially after playing so many open world games recently, I'm really enjoying this more focused structure, and I really wouldn't mind if more modern games went back to this style. At the time of making this video, I'm only about 10 hours into the game, and I'm still having a really great time. I'm in this bizarre dream world called The Fade, and it feels like a really big turning point in the story. I've been completely separated from my party, which has completely changed how I approach combat. Then I met this guy who taught me how to turn into a mouse for some reason, and I can access new areas through these little mouse holes, which I find funny. Then before I knew it, I'm learning several other transformations like this creepy spirit thing, a fireman who's like a man who's on fire for some reason, and even a huge golem that can stand up to bigger threats and even take out hordes of enemies on its own. I had no idea that this would be something my character could do, so it's been really fun messing around with all these new abilities. That's also kind of the beauty of finally trying out an old game that you know next to nothing about. In this age of the internet, it's easy to think you know everything about a piece of media because you've watched a couple of videos about it on YouTube. But it's really nice finally trying something out and realizing that it isn't what you thought it was, if that makes sense. This game has been around for a decade and a half, and I never thought I'd really get anything out of it personally, but here I am enjoying it so much that I decided to make a video just yapping about it, and I think that's really cool. So if you are interested in getting into the Dragon Age series and don't know where to start, I think Origins still holds up really well. I'm a big advocate for playing game series in order of release because I think it's really not only interesting but important to see how gameplay evolves with each iteration within a game's respective series. With Dragon Age, it could be argued that these early entries are a bit rough around the edges, and I've seen a lot of people online say that it is acceptable to start with Inquisition. But I don't know, I don't really think that Origins has aged that poorly. I do think that it would be nice if EA released some kind of simple remaster with a few quality of life improvements and a performance boost, but if you're like me and don't want to wait for that, and you want to play the series before the new game comes out, the original is still absolutely worth playing. And I'm saying that as someone who's currently playing the game on Xbox 360, which many would argue is the objectively worst way, or one of the worst ways to play this game, and I'm still having a great time with it. So there you have my first impressions of Dragon Age Origins, a game that I think is absolutely worth playing today. I'd love to give a full review of the game eventually once I finish it, but I was having such a good time with it that I just wanted to get my initial thoughts out there in this video. Anyways guys, I just want to thank you if you stuck with me this far. Thank you so much for watching, stick around for more, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.